Okay, class, so today we are still going to continue looking at equations and inequalities and just reviewing them and how we solve them. So same drill as yesterday, we're just gonna go a little bit more in depth with them. If you're like, oh my gosh, I don't remember these pieces and I need way more explanation, meet me on Canvas conferences, sign up for an appointment to work with me, or go back and watch some of the videos that I have linked at the top of the page from the very beginning of the year. Okay, so let's say we have equations, and now we're going to be talking about maybe variables happening multiple times. So maybe we have something like 4x plus 12 minus 2x equals 40. Okay, so remember when we are dealing with multiple variables, we sort of have two situations. Those variables can be on the same side of an equal sign, or they can be on opposite sides of the equal sign, right? So if our equal sign is right here, right, both of these variables are happening on the left-hand side. So they are on the same side of the equal sign. And when variables are on the same side of the equal sign, we get them together with the same sign. So we always use what sign is in front of them, right? So we have a positive 4x minus 2x. So a positive 4 and a negative 2 will give us a 2x. And then once we are at this point, right, this is just something we can solve with our basic inverse operations. Okay, the other thing that might happen is when we have multiple variables, they might be on opposite sides of the equal sign. Let's see, this is a weird number. Okay, so let's say if we're here, right, our equal sign is here, and now we have one variable on the left and one variable on the right. So now our variables are on opposite sides of the equal sign. And when variables are on opposite sides of the equal sign, we have to use the opposite sign to get them together. Okay, so again, we'll always look at what sign is in front of it, and then we want to use the opposite sign of it. So if it was positive, I'm going to make it a negative, right? And we sort of write it underneath where the x's are located. Now, again, this is a negative 7. That sign in front of it stays put. And then once we're there, we can just solve like normal. Again, if your negatives or something you're struggling with, use a calculator. Don't worry about that piece. Just check your math as you're going through. Okay, and we get there. So we should sort of be able to deal with variables if they're in different places. Now, we also then have the additional piece that we can talk about with inequalities. And that piece sort of opens some new things that we would need to consider. So for example, compound inequalities. So we could solve inequalities with variables on both sides or opposite sides using this exact same process, but it also opened the door for compound inequalities. And remember, we talked about compound or and compound and. Compound or was always just two separate inequalities connected by the word or. Okay, and you would solve them separately in graph, but when you graphed them, you would always use where at least one of them was happening. And it usually went out, like the oars on a boat go out, right? It usually went out. So anywhere we had at least one. Compound and, we might see two separate inequalities with the word and written in between it, but we also could see it all together in one big chunk. Right? And compound and inequalities, when we get our final graph, is anywhere where they are both happening. Okay, so let's say we have something like, well, first let's just do our graphing rules. Maybe that's a better starting place. So let's say we wanted to graph something like y is less than or equal to 10, right? Remember we had, that's a terrible line, but let's pretend. Okay, so remember, we would have to consider an open circle or a filled-in circle at 10, and that would be based on this inequality symbol. So when it was an or equal to, that meant we wanted a filled-in or a solid circle. Okay, and anything that was less than, we would shade to the left. Okay, anything that didn't have the or equal to would be an open circle, and anything that's greater than, we would shade to the right. Okay, now let's say we actually want to solve a compound inequality. I'm just pulling that one I wrote down up there. Right, remember, we kind of want to ignore the fact that there's anything happening over here to the left and just start solving this like a basic inequality. Okay, so we'd ignore this and we'd say, okay, the first thing that we would do to solve this is we would subtract 4 from each side. But because there's actually a third side happening over here, we would subtract that 4 in all 3 places. Okay, and then we'd go back and we would do the same thing, right? So if we sort of ignored this, our next step would be to divide by 2. And then again, right, we would do that in all 3 places. Okay, again, reminder just from yesterday, anytime that you would multiply or divide by a negative, you would need to flip the inequality sign. The last thing that we would need to consider today is that we also then open the door for equations or inequalities to have no solution, all solutions, or still just solve and get a regular one solution. So maybe if we have something like, I'm going to stick to something sort of simple here just because, again, I'm just sort of giving you some basic review stuff. Right, so if we start solving just by our basic rules, okay, and our variables go away, right? Those 4x minus 4x is 0. Same thing over here. So we're just left with 10 is greater than or equal to 10. Remember, we then had to consider if it was a true statement or a false statement. Okay, if we got a true statement, we would say that our answer was all real solutions. Now, you're going to see, we've talked about this like on iStep, sorry, I'm kicking my table, on iStep or different places where it's asking you how many solutions it has. Not what the answer is, but how many answers it has. Remember, those all real solutions there's an infinite amount of numbers in all real solutions because it's anything, so we can't count them all. So a true statement, right, has an answer of all real numbers or all real solutions, which we would also then say has an infinite number of solutions. Okay, so 10 being greater than or equal to 10 is true, so this is all real numbers. The number of solutions that it has is infinite. If we got a false statement, so maybe we solve and we get 7 equals 22, if it's an equation, right? If it's false, we then say that it has no solutions. And no solutions makes sense. I mean, it has no solutions. Okay, anything that we actually get an answer to, so if we solve and we get an actual answer, this has one solution. Okay, so those are the concepts you're gonna need to use as you go through your assignment today with solving equations and inequalities that are just a little bit more steps than what we looked at yesterday. So let me know if you have any questions or go back and look at some of those other videos that I linked on the top of the homepage. Otherwise, good luck, and I will touch base with you all tomorrow.